everyone, Alexa Dunn here, and today I am going to be talking about filter words in your manuscript and how pulling back on and fixing a lot of your filtering language, not completely eliminating, we are going to talk about that, will do nothing but strengthen and improve your writing. This came up in my recent video on 5 major pitfalls of amateur writers and writing and how to fix them. Filtering came up a ton in a couple of the things that I was talking about, especially telling, and it is very, very true. A big culprit of weak writing is filtering, which is why I wanted to make a whole video about it, in part so I could go more in depth, give you more examples, but also talk a lot more about kind of the exceptions or really the danger of all or nothing prescriptive writing craft advice. I've honestly put off making this video for such a long time because I really don't like being a hypocrite, and the thing is, I definitely use filtering in my writing. But that said, I use filtering far less than I used to when I was a novice. I never intentionally tried to fix the filtering in my writing, but just over time, as I developed my writing skills and worked on my issues with telling, I got better at writing without filtering. But I definitely still use filter language. And so to that end, I want to talk about, I've said it before, the thing with kind of grammar and the rules of writing is that once you know and understand why things are the way they are or why things shouldn't be a certain way, essentially knowing the rules, knowing the mechanics, and kind of knowing what words and phrases and constructions and grammar and usage do for a reader, you can know the rules to break them or really to do anything in moderation. Anything in moderation can certainly be done. And with most craft advice, I never think it's all or nothing. And I really rub up against instances of writing advice that do that. It's why I don't like people who say you can't be a writer if you don't outline. You have to write every day. Adverbs are bad. It should always be short, simple sentences, etc., so on and so forth. I think that doesn't account for writing style. I don't think that accounts for really just different storytelling techniques or different lifestyles, habits, etc. that we all have. There's no one way to write a novel, like literally in terms of write every day or outline. And very rarely is there a hard and fast rule about writing that can never be artfully or thoughtfully broken. So this all brings me to, what are filter words? How do you even know what they are? How do you look for them? How do they work? How do you fix them? And what are some of those exceptions? Filter words are essentially verbs that filter the reader's experience of a thing through the eyes of the main character. It's going to be a lot of kind of I constructions, I feel, I see, I know, I assume, or of course it can be used in third person, she sees, she hears, etc. And the thing is, of course you're filtering things through the lens of your main character. Isn't that the point of fiction and writing? And actually from that does come some of the exceptions that we're going to talk about. It is not uniformly always wrong or bad to filter things through the lens, the perspective of your main character. The problem is when you do it too much. Everything in moderation. When every single sentence or majority of your sentences and kind of images and moments in your story of action are filtered, you're actually bogging down your action. You're adding distance to that action and making for a passive reading experience. So even though technically what is happening on the page is active, you're filtering it, making it feel more passive. And passive reading experiences are just no fun. You get into the whole realm of telling versus showing, yes, but I also like to talk about it in terms of narration versus dramatization. And even with telling, it's not a hard and fast. You always are going to need to have telling in a book, but if it's all telling, if it's a lot of filtering, it bogs down the writing and it just makes for, it's a less direct, less effective reading experience. The images aren't going to be as vivid and you will end up inadvertently frustrating your reader, and often the reader can't even pinpoint what it is about writing that is frustrating them, but very often you'll find that it's the filtering. What are actual filter words? I mentioned a few, but I'm gonna run through a list, not comprehensive, but has a decent number on them, the kind of the really common ones that you're going to do inadvertently, you see a lot. So those include feel, hear, see, sense, believe, assume, realize, watch, wonder, notice, looks or look, seems, decide, and know. You see what I mean? Like a ton of these words, they feel very natural. These are ones that I've gone very heavy to the well of a few of these words, still do. Like I said, we're going to talk about how it's not all or nothing. And it feels very natural to use a lot of these, especially in an I construction, in a first-person narrative. It's part of making it feel more personal. Well, yeah, you know, they feel something. So I'm not going to tell you to get rid of these words, but these words will be a starting point for you. Very good words to do a find function if you're in Microsoft Word. See where they pop up in your manuscript. See how you're using them. And I'm offering this as kind of a either 101 to 201 tip or 201 and beyond tip. If you're kind of more of a novice beginner writer, I encourage you to pick a few of these words, big culprits. Feel is a major culprit, see is a big one, looks, and do that find function. And you don't have to change them all. My challenge to you, just to, at the start of leveling up, aim for a third of the instances of any of these given words in your manuscript. Only pick 3 or 4 of them. You don't have to tackle all of them, and some are really kind of worse than others in the sense that they introduce more distance than others. And just comb through your manuscript, or even just take it one chapter at a time. Try it with one scene. Give it to a critique partner and see how a scene where you actively work to reduce your filtering lands with them. It's usually going to land better. If you're a more advanced writer, maybe you are a little harsher with yourself, you go for eliminating half of them. But also, if you're a more advanced writer, you may have already unintentionally gotten better at using these less. So you might not necessarily have to be super harsh, but it's still definitely worth doing a look at your manuscript. I did a search on my manuscript to find examples for you, and I'm happy to say it wasn't too ridiculous, but I still found some filtering that I think ultimately is okay because it represents such a small percentage of my manuscript, but that is why I am not the writer who's going to tell you that you can never use these or you're a garbage writer. Just do the best you can, especially if you have a feeling that your writing isn't as effective as it could be, if you end up in situations where your readers aren't connecting to your characters as much, or maybe where an action scene isn't landing the way that you want it to. You can always only improve if you think about kind of how you were using filtering language in your manuscript. Now for the promised examples. So I have 2 examples where I took something from my book, The Ivies, and I only use my own work in examples so that I don't kind of dump on any other writer. 2 of them, I took passages that didn't really have filtering in them, and I tried to create filtering. It was a weird challenge. I'll fully admit the second one's a little ridiculous, but I wanted to make a point. And then I found some instances in my manuscript where there is still filtering. I was looking at the pre-copy edit version, so pretty close to final, but where I feel confident in my use of filtering in these instances, and I'm going to talk about why. And again, it's such a small percentage of my manuscript where these words came up that I think it's okay. A few instances here and there are not going to completely pull the reader out of the manuscript. And as I mentioned, filtering is actually a natural function, especially of first person. And in some cases, it's just going to feel right. So the first example, I'm going to start with the version with filtering, then I'm going to read my version without, remembering these didn't have filtering to start, so in fairness, the ones without are going to sound better. But I want you to kind of compare and see the difference, and I am going to have them on screen. So first, the paragraph with filtering. I sense anxiety pushing at my limbs as I move quickly toward the exit. Don't want to keep still. I feel the crisp December air as I burst outside and savor the way my blood vessels constrict. Sensory distraction. It seems cold. I see campus awash with browns, reds, and grays. We've had 1 snow so far this year, and we're still in that stretch where your nose feels the cold, but nothing as pretty as snow deigns to fall. Now I'm going to read you the original, and I have to say, From an editing perspective, I don't think I would have arrived at some of this imagery if this had started out as a paragraph that had a ton of filtering in it. I definitely had to kind of force filtering into it. And that's the takeaway when it comes to learning to filter less. You'll get practiced at it, so when you go in to write a description, you'll be so used to not filtering your language that your descriptions and actions are going to come out stronger because you've learned to better and more actively write passages. So I honestly prefer the original passages that have no filtering in them for that reason. I think I pulled better phrasing and descriptions out of myself by not starting off with filtering. Okay, so the original passage without filtering. Anxiety pushes at my limbs and I move quickly toward the exit. Don't want to keep still. I burst out into the crisp December air and savor the way my blood vessels constrict. Sensory distraction. It's cold. Campus a mix of browns, reds, and grays. We've had one snow so far this year, but we're still in the stretch where your nose is nipped, but nothing as pretty as snow deigns to fall. As you can see, the difference between the two, well, the second one, the original one, you just feel a little bit more present in the moment and the scene, and I hope that you feel more strongly what my character is feeling without my having to tell you what she's feeling, if that makes sense. Now on to the second example. This is the one I fully admit is ridiculous. I had to push myself much harder. I started with a passage that felt like it had kind of a lot of characterization and specificity and tautness to it, and I pushed myself to make it as basic as possible with as many different types of filtering in it. I think it is slightly ridiculous, but I'm still going to share this with you. It's definitely an example to illustrate a point. So, the one with filtering. I see Emma come in 5 minutes late and notice her lips look swollen. I assume she's been kissing Tyler and that's why she's late. Avery appears annoyed and I watch her narrow her eyes at Emma, then signal to Margot to start. Emma looks between me and Sierra on the love seat, deciding she'll fit. Now the original is completely different. And definitely an example of something I wrote because I've learned to not filter as much. I wanted to communicate the personalities of the girls in a scene where they're all together and imply that there is some tension. Emma breezes in 5 minutes late with kiss-swollen lips that announce precisely the reason for her tardiness. Avery shoots her a look, then checks that Margot is ready to go as Emma shimmies her tiny body in between Sierra and me on the love seat. So as you can see in that example, I mean, I pushed really hard in the filtered version, but to show you the difference between my main character almost pussyfooting around things by assuming, by saying, well, she looks like this, and instead having her make more outright statements. She's editorializing directly for the reader. It's not that Avery appears annoyed. She observes, but I don't tell you she observes because she's assumed to be the first person perspective that she shoots her a look. I'm being a little bit tricky with a look, but it's a voicey thing of like, you know when someone just like gives you that 1,000-yard stare. I mean, maybe I could have just said 1,000-yard stare, but I chose a look so that you can fill it in with however much bitchiness you want to, because that is who Avery is. And then just having Emma breeze in. It's a strong action verb that also tells you something about her character. She gives 0 Fs that she is late, that she is wasting her friend's time, and there's some tension that crackles between her and Avery for that reason. Emma's being a little ballsy, honestly. And then, of course, it's not I see that her lips are swollen and I assume she's late because she's been kissing her boyfriend. Her lips are kiss swollen. That is the observation. Olivia knows what that looks like, and that is why she's late. There's no assumption there. So I hope that's a good example of just kind of the difference that you can make by just making different choices of literally how you were saying and describing something, purposefully not using filtering language. Now for some acceptable filtering ? These are some of the ones that I pulled up where I feel justified in using some filtering. I know why I did it, and survived all the way to copy edits this way, because there are some instances, especially in first person limited third, when you're deep into a POV, where it's going to be legitimate. The character feels something. I have a case of I hear here as well that I feel okay about. And it's examples where to try to write it differently is almost more awkward, and it'll be more distracting for the reader than just using some basic filtering, acceptable filtering. So two of these are actually from a similar scene or similar interaction. It's Olivia, my main character, interacting with her crush. So I think the reason I tended toward filtering in both of these examples unintentionally is that she's very in her feelings in these moments. And so there's intentionally more filtering because she is hyper aware of what she is feeling and her reactions. So the first example, "Hey Olivia," a familiar voice fills my stomach with butterflies. I turn inelegantly to find Ethan. He reaches past me to grab some chips. "Why are you by yourself?" "No reason." "Why?" "Hey, it wasn't an accusation, though it is odd to see you without your friends." I feel a pang of resentment. I am capable of operating alone. "What are you doing here?" I flip back on him. So I feel a pang of resentment. Writing that actively, it'd be like, what, resentment spikes through me, resentment sours. I'll be honest, those are kind of physical, action-based phrases that I use in other places in this manuscript to have kind of a non-filtered reaction type thing, and I didn't want to overuse them. This is a case where I just don't think it really matters that I snuck in a little filtering statement. Perhaps you disagree, but I don't think it's too egregious. Same thing with the next one. The next one I have a better justification for. "I'm not that interesting," he says, humoring me. "That's not true. Your dad's an ambassador and your mom works for MSNBC. That's pretty cool." "You writing my biography?" Ethan's eyes glint with amusement, but I feel my cheeks heat. Did I just blow my crush cover? I feel my cheeks heat. So if you've watched my bad fanfiction writing habits video, you probably know why I used filtering for this one. And the reason is she can't see herself. I could just say my cheeks heat. I use that in other instances. I don't say I blush because she can't see herself. So it's definitely the cheeks heating that is important because we're in her perspective. But in this case, in conjunction with the rest of the description, and as I mentioned, she's hyper aware of every reaction in her body, everything that's happening to her, because she is so kind of like in this tense, awkward moment with this guy that she has a crush on. I went for the I feel my cheeks heat. It's like her body has betrayed her and is acting against her, and it's almost involuntary. So in this kind of instance, I want the distancing that comes from the filtering. It is intentional. Similarly, my next example, I'll be honest, when I found it, I was like, that's a little bit lazy, but I can also justify it for myself, and I just wanted to offer these examples to you so you know that I too am human and I filter. This one, my main character is very hyper aware of everything that is happening around her. This happens to be a tense scene as part of the suspense. So she's looking for what's happening around her. She's listening for things around her. She's in a very kind of eerie and isolated situation. And so the filtering that I have is, suddenly I hear the unmistakable sounds of wheels on gravel. Shit, Paul, the night security guard, must be doing his patrol. So what is key here, so this is from a very tense scene that I wrote in my thriller, and early versions of this scene I really struggled with. If you just want like a view into my writing process, my agent didn't quite like how it was functioning, my editor had notes on it, and I didn't know how to fix it overall. And I realized that a huge portion of it had too much filtering. So in this section, I very purposely switched to a ton of more active language. I removed a ton of the filtering, and this comes very late in the scene, almost where she comes back to herself, snaps to her senses. And so I used some filtering right there. But it's the kind of case where, again, it's not going to ruin the entire scene. The distance isn't a bad thing in this instance because she is hyper aware of where she is and what is happening. So it's one that I'm just kind of shrug emojiing. It's not a total crime against writing and humanity that I inadvertently slipped some filtering into that instance. In this instance, I had already used a ton of fragments in this section to have some more of that active writing. And so here I didn't want to do that again. I'm sure if I combed further into my manuscript, I could find even more examples. I mean, I know I could because I did a find search. I searched for feel and then I searched for here and I found these 3 examples for you, but I won't bore you. But you kind of get the point. Some filtering is okay. Too much filtering definitely ruins the reading experience. It's more a sign of amateur writing, and you have to be able to kind of push yourself and challenge yourself to do less filtering. It makes your writing stronger. Let me know down below in the comments any questions you have about filtering, filter words, filter language, or if there's any that I left out of my list that you can think of, definitely drop them down below. Give this video a thumbs up if you like, and I will make more craft type chats and discussion videos. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.